Hey everybody, how are you? It's Friday afternoon around 3:30. At my desk here doing a little work. I thought I would shoot a little quick video and follow up on a couple of notes that I've left people, as well as respond to a couple of notes I've received from folks on what I said yesterday, which is that we need articular independence in order to have articular interdependence. That was a phrase that a lot of people, or at least a few of you, seem to resonate a little bit with and wanted to learn more about. And this video, what I want to share with you right now, is related very much to the fact that many of you, some of you, I don't know whether it's many or not, but some of you have seen an increase in a prescription for yoga, whether it was initially to do an assessment and help me get a sense of where you are from a mobility or flexibility perspective. But also, and along with that, some of you have seen yoga programmed into your script, and there are obviously some of those classes on doyogawithme.com that I've referred some of you to. And so this idea of articular independence before articular interdependence is very much related to that. And I think now is a really good time to discuss these topics and talk about them a little bit and provide reminders to all of you as to what your ultimate responsibilities are. What are you trying to do with this work that you are doing? And the first thing I want to say is our primary goal with all of the supplemental training that we do is to become better human beings, to function better the way that we have from an evolutionary biology point of view, the way we've been self-selected to function. When we look at the human being, what we see is that hunter-gatherers spent virtually the entire day moving, changing positions, and then a few other things, obviously. But the point of the story is our lifestyles have led us to this point where we've got some imbalances that perhaps to address in conjunction with imbalances or issues which have happened because of sports such as running, which is very sagittal plane and very repetitive and will lead to some imbalances over time if we don't mix other things in. What's my point? Everything that we can do to become better humans, to move more, to get out of our chairs more, to get down on the floor and do this movement or that movement, whether it's a Turkish get-up or a series of core 4 or active isolated or 90-90 progressions, whatever we can do to move our bodies three-dimensionally is going to really help joint health and help with fascial health as well too. But I want to step back a little bit more and talk in a little bit more detail to that than that. And I want to say, start with this idea: a mobility exercise, whatever it is not a mobility exercise if the joints involved are not moving the way that they're supposed to be moving. Think about that. Let me repeat it. A mobility exercise is not a mobility exercise if the joints in question are not moving the way that they're supposed to be. Let me use one example. Humeral head, scapular, glenoid fossa, right? That arm bone goes right into that. Well, the definition of a joint, it literally, is this idea that there is this independence, right? That humeral head should move inside of that glenoid fossa freely and easily. But for various reasons, what happens with many of our joints is that there isn't that movement. So if I'm a swimmer and I'm going to reach out and I want to try to create that high elbow, and I've talked many times about the rotation of the humerus inside of that glenoid fossa, but what if those two bones which meet in that shoulder What if they are not moving independently? What if there is not that articular independence that I mentioned? What if as soon as I start to bend the elbow and that humeral head doesn't move inside that glenoid fossa, what I get is a complete protraction and internal rotation, which is now not the movement that we want. So no matter what I try to do to improve my swimming skill, if I don't have that articular independence, I'm not going to be able to achieve what I want. What if I'm working on a yoga pose and let's just say cobra or upward facing dog, where I'm looking for extension from each one of those facet joints in my spine? Well, what if a number or any one of those individual joints is not moving as it should? What will often happen is that stress will be placed on the joint above or the joint below, and we'll end up with excess laxity or motion in one of those joints above or below the joint that may not be moving as it should be. So even though I'm moving up into that cobra and I may think that I'm working on thoracic spine extension, what I'm really doing is carrying some compensation or dysfunction within the spine, because there is that one joint that isn't moving as it should be, or as an example. So what I'm calling a mobility exercise is in fact just another compensated movement that really isn't helping me in any way, shape, or form, and in fact may be hurting me. And these are the same kinds of things that can happen at any one of our joints, especially those that we really need to be mobile. And the hips are the obvious example, as are the ankles. So again, coming back to what I said earlier, a mobility exercise is not a mobility exercise unless the joints involved are moving as they should be. So number one, and this is kind of the crux of what I want to share with you, the yoga can be a feel-good kind of thing to do for many of you. It can be restorative, it can be relaxing, and there are elements of it, of course, that are mobility and or flexibility oriented. But it's not targeted stretching, and it can just as easily be compensated as any other movement. And that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for you to just go through a whole series of mobility exercises and carry the same compensations which may have existed earlier. What we need to do is we need to work on the hardware, right? And again, this is another really good point or good reminder. When we look at our body, we've got hardware and we've got software. And the software is tricky stuff. The work that I do as a fascial stretch therapist, when I do it, when I'm going through some stretching myself, or when I'm demonstrating or showing somebody some stretching type exercise, and you can throw yoga in as well. Why the feeling of restriction? Why the feeling of stiffness? Why is this hamstring feel tight? Why, these are software related issues which are very tricky because they involve the nervous system, what the brain's trying to do. There are so many difficult mechanisms involved, and it's very difficult to ascertain exactly what's going on. The hardware, on the other hand, is much simpler. If you have a joint, the hip joint, one hip joint or the other joint, the ankle joint, if you don't have enough range of motion, if there's something sticking and something isn't moving as freely as it should be. And again, the reasons for that are usually, going back to what I said 9 minutes ago, lifestyle oriented. We're not being good human beings. We're not moving. We're not deep squatting. I mean, I tell you all the time, man, I need this as much as anybody. I'll jump out of my chair and I'll get right down onto the floor and just sit in a deep squat and pry back and forth and move around and get down in 90-90 and do things which bring me back to how my body really loves to function. Because when a joint stops moving, it seizes up. When a joint stops moving, we stop getting that synovial fluid into that joint. It becomes less healthy. It ultimately becomes stiffer, all of the soft tissue around it becomes stiffer. Bad things happen. And this is what we see all over our society. And of course, these things ultimately lead to compensation, which if you load any kind of a system that is compensated or dysfunctional in any way, you're going to get a much higher risk of injury. And that's where the injury element comes from, okay? So going back to what I said earlier, what I'm trying to drive home here is, number one, spend time on the hardware, which is the health of the individual joints that need to move. It's not necessarily a good idea to just go through the motions with a yoga pose if you've got one joint that perhaps would benefit from some soft tissue work or from some kind of myofascial release. And that's a different topic entirely, which I should probably get into at some point, and we'll need to talk about more. But some manipulation of some kind, some self-mobilization of an individual joint. So much of this starts with our feet, making sure your toes are working, making sure you're moving and working that first ray, and that there's mobility in the front of the foot, going in and out of eversion, so forth and so on, whether it's the yoga toes or whatever. So again, the individual mobilization, the hardware within the foot as an example, to facilitate then being able to move into other a little bit more complex movements and carry less compensation. And then the other thing is self-awareness, right? So becoming very in tune with your body and understanding where are your limitations and why. And we don't want to throw a 30-minute yoga class against the wall and hope something sticks and you come out of that feeling better on a permanent basis, because the odds of that happening are very small. And it's very easy to overdo any of it, as I've seen many times over with folks that end up becoming almost, shall I say, addicted to that feeling of pushing stretches right to their end range to the point where you've gone well past where you want to be. You got to become aware, and again, let's just go back. Remember your gait analysis in the beginning. What do? We identified some tissues that were a little short or shorter than perhaps they should be. We worked to try to address those with targeted stretching and targeted movements, motions. Doesn't necessarily have to be the same movements or motions as you might have done in the past. In fact, some variety is really good. There's a lot of ways to go after these things. But what I'm encouraging is, don't just go, oh, okay, coach is now saying all I need to do is 30 minutes of this yoga class and I can forget any of the other targeted stretching that I may have done in the past. That's not what I'm suggesting, and it's not what I recommend. And ultimately, all of these things, and you've heard this before, are a moving target. So it isn't like there's just one way in which you're going to approach it, and it's always going to be that way. Everything comes out or emanates out of your self-awareness, your sensory input, your kinesthetic awareness, your understanding of, hey, this feels tight, or this feels short, or I can clearly see that this seems to be short. Is it short? Check with me, go back to your original analysis, see where you're at, reshoot video, ask if you're not really sure. Because only then are you going to be able to approach everything and always keep everything pretty much on the straight and narrow in terms of where you're spending your time and energy. And then, of course, there's the whole idea that if you're able to make some kind of momentary or temporary change in tissue length, what do you need to do to make sure that your nervous system remembers what that is, right? And again, the software issues are complex and difficult to diagnose and to chase, but the hardware stuff is pretty easy, right? We got to move more. We got to move three-dimensionally more. If I was going to give one recommendation to all of you, you don't need me to program it. I'd get up every day, and the first thing I'd do is get-ups, because it's a simple three-dimensional movement that works you through rotation, internal and external of the hips. It's a lunging pattern, it's a squatting pattern. You don't have to put any weight on, just do them without load. Do them with your arm posted. Go through 2 or 3 in the morning when you first get up, just to kind of turn everything on. And again, at least you're moving. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach it, but that's one simple way in which you can do it. So I think that, that's one thing to consider or to come back to. All right, so, all right, I'm going to stop here. It's just 15 minutes. There's a lot of information here. So feel free to go back and listen to this again. And by all means, follow up with questions if you have them. Please and thank you. All right. Have a good weekend. Go Pats.